afternoon. I take it from that some of you have been to this lecture before. Okay, firstly, thanks for coming. It's always a pleasure to be here. You may imagine over the last 12 years I have talked a lot and shown you guys a lot of stuff. And it seems like a fairly one-way communication. The fact that for the last 9 months, my primary creative focus has been on producing a card game for people like you to enjoy should perhaps give you the idea that the communication was not all in one direction. So, without your influence, this wouldn't have happened. Now, it introduces an interesting problem. How do we take something that is completely sort of three-dimensional, four-dimensional, it exists in space and time, has a huge psychological component, a huge physical component. A sword fight is not easily reduced to a game. Okay, so the problem that we've had over the last 9 months is how to take the bits of sword fighting that can be represented in another medium and do that. The fundamental problem is the difference between analog and digital. So, I hope it's obvious that on one side we have something old and beautiful and gorgeous and desirable, and on the other hand we have something modern and expensive and fucking horrible. Did that message get across? Okay. I am not opposed to things digital. This is an iPad you see before you. Yes? Digital has its place, but it introduces a problem of definition. Okay? And this is best expressed, in my opinion, as the difference between a spectrum and a paint box. Okay? On the one hand, we have a wonder of nature, and on the other hand, we have a child's toy. Yes? Now, I have 2 children, so I am intimately familiar with paint boxes, and one of the things that children insist on is it red or blue or purple? You can't say, well, it's red, but with a touch of blue, it's heading to... No, Daddy, is it red or blue or purple? They need these solid definitions, and this is exactly how game designers behave. Is our game designer here? He should be. Samily, where are you? Oh, he's hiding. He's frightened. No. The thing is, there is a whole set of skills to creating a game that I just simply do not possess. So, it has always been my habit, when I want to achieve something and I don't have the skills to do it, I find somebody who is deeply obsessed with the minutiae and the craft of the thing I am wanting to do, and I get them to do it for me. It makes for a much better product. So, but still, the question of, well, if I take a sword, suddenly I'm a lot more comfortable. You might not think it, but you lot are scary. You might be mean to me, but when I've got this, no worries. So, okay. In swordsmanship, one of the very first things anybody learns is that there's not just one blow of the sword, there is a specific number, and each angle will have its own name. So here we have a forehand blow that goes downwards. Yes? This is mandritto fendente. Forehand, mandritto fendente, downwards blow. Here we have mandritto mezzano, which is a forehand blow coming across. But between the perfect line of fendente and the perfect line of mezzano, there is an infinite number of gradations. And the question is, when does this become that? At what point in this turn does it change? And here's the problem. There is no answer. Yes, it depends. Every time the game designer rings me up and says, Guy, what happens if? I have to choke back, it depends. Because he needs a proper answer. And the answer is, well, if my opponent has to deal with this thing I'm throwing at them as if it was in this line, then it becomes mezzano. And if he has to deal with it in this line, well, then we call it fendente. So it's basically a matter of perception on the part of your opponent that determines the line of your blow. Okay? Now, tell that to somebody who started swordsmanship yesterday. It's not fair. So the thing that made it all possible was I realized that my game designer was not a highly experienced professional. He was a beginner showing up on a beginner's course needing concrete answers to specific questions. And in class, I have no problem telling beginners, well, no, this is fendente and this is mezzano, and don't get them confused. So, now, knowing the names of things is the beginning of wisdom. Okay, that's a quote from Consilient's excellent book by E.O. Wilson. And on the picture up there, you can see the two fendente blows, mandrit or forehand and roverso backhand. Okay? Now, of course, at some point between here and here, there's a grey area where sometimes it's forehand and sometimes it's backhand, and really, who can tell the difference? Okay? But if you don't know the names, if you cannot classify the actions that you're making, then you have no way to study. So without knowing the names of things, you cannot possibly study the art. Also, every subculture has its own language. And one of the first things you need to do when you are entering into any new culture is to pick up the critical bits of the language. For example, within 30 seconds of arriving in Finland, I figured out the best way to make friends was to make jokes against the Swedish. It worked. So I have a little pop quiz for you. From what subculture does that come? Any ideas? What? Not wrestling. At least I hope not. No ideas? Sorry? Nope. You lot are very clean-minded. I was sure someone would come up with a filthy answer. No, they come from... Would you like me to explain them? Would you like me to explain them? Right, okay. What? Good man. Yo-yo. Right? If you were to go to a yo-yo competition and you did not know what those things were, people would laugh at you. Right? Would you like me to demonstrate? What is responsive play? Okay, classic yo-yo. It goes down, and it comes up again. Are you impressed? Oh, just as an aside, right? In March this year, I took one of my kids to a toy shop because she had some money from the Tooth Fairy, and while she was buying sparkly things with, high heels and, magic wands and stuff, I saw a yo-yo, this one, and I thought, back when I was a kid, I really enjoyed yo-yoing, and so I bought one. And do you know what? It's one of the best €4 I've ever spent. And, responsive play is when it goes down the string and back up again. That's simple. When you tug it, it tends to come. Do you want to see a really cool trick? All right. This is called Rock the Baby. This begs the question, what is unresponsive play? Yes? For that, I need a different yo-yo. This one's different, because when you send it down, it doesn't come up again. And you might think to yourself, what is the flipping use of that? Yes, it's a yo-yo that doesn't work. It's broken, and it's like 10 times the price of the one that actually works. Completely useless. Or not. Because with this one, I can demonstrate on the trapeze and binding. Binding is the means by which you get an unresponsive yo-yo to climb back up the string. Okay? Now I have to wind it up again, and I'm going to need 2 hands, so I might have to shout a bit. Let's see if I can do it on the trapeze. I'm a bit nervous. I've never actually performed yo-yo to an audience before. I just play with it. Other than my daughters, of course, who are deeply impressed by anything that actually works until they get bored of it. Now, grinding, all evidence to the contrary notwithstanding, I'm not actually able to do yet. Because what that is you get the yo-yo spinning so fast that you actually get it to, for example, balance on your thumb while it is still spinning, and then you get it to snap up back the string, right? I got into this because I was teaching a seminar in Oulu in April, and I was staying in an apartment on my own, and I was bored, and at about 10 o'clock at night, I thought, this will tell you how old I am. I wonder if there are any videos on YouTube about yo-yo. The answer is not more than 1 million. And so I found out that there were these people who were doing these absolutely incredible things. I mean, just go and have a look. It is astonishing what people can do with a bit of plastic going up and down a string. It's marvelous. But the thing is, if you can't distinguish between the various moving parts, the various mounts, for example, on the trapeze mount. A mount is a way of getting it onto the string. Dirty-minded lot, be quiet. Yes? You get it onto the string with a mount. Yeah? And to dismount, you get it off the string again. It's absolutely incredible. If you can't follow the individual parts of the more complicated tricks, you can't possibly learn them. And if you don't have a name for the individual parts of the different tricks, you can't possibly learn them. So this process of taking something complicated and chopping it up into bits and naming each bit and pretending each bit is completely separate from every other bit is an essential part at the beginning of mastering any skill. And this is what we had to do to take swordsmanship and turn it into a card game. Now, I've forgotten what slide comes next. Let's have a look. Ah, yes. So, this is what should happen. Tell you what, why don't I get Ken and Carrie to demonstrate what should happen? You can borrow that. Oh, you need a sword. There you go. So, let's say, for example, Carrie attacks Ken with a mandrilo fendente. Yeah, marvelous. And that was classically correct. There's a nice, clear beginning guard position which we can name from the treatise, post-Doridonna. The line of the blow. Just a fraction this way. Right? Let's say the line of the blow accurately reflects the many, many hours of training Carrie has done. Now, as that comes in, Ken parries and strikes. And everything went exactly like the book. Marvelous. Okay. How many times, relax, how many times does that happen in a sword fight? None. None. Okay? So what is that? That is, if a sword comes towards your head and it is behaving in such a way that it is appropriate to treat it in the way that I'm about to tell you, and you hit it, and after you've hit it, it behaves in a way that creates this particular opportunity, that is what you should do. You see how vague that is? Yeah? Now that is of course not how the book is written, and is not how the game would work either, but it's how things actually happen. The examples we see in the book are if you like, moments of perfection. Yes? They are perfect examples of what happens when the colors in the paint box exactly match the middle band, or the middle of each band in the rainbow. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm a one for mixing my metaphors, so if you get lost, just call me back. So, that is what should happen, and that is what actually happens. Yes? Somebody smacks you in the face with the wrong end of the sword. Happens all the time. Yes, chaps? Happens all the time. So, of course, this also has to be reflected in the game. There has to be aspects of the game that reflect the randomness of what actually happens when two swords come together. Now, let me explain this again. Karen, if I could borrow you, and Ken, if I could borrow you. So, you don't need a mask. So, let's say Carrie comes to strike again and Ken parries. Just hold that moment. Okay, now, Carrie's sword has been beaten all the way the hell over here. Marvellous. Sometimes that does actually happen. It requires a lot of commitment on his part and a sort of blind adherence to his original plan. People do that under stress, but not all the time. Now, at this point, Ken effortlessly strikes over the arm, just like in the book. Now, here's the thing. Come back to the parry. If the parry has worked, yes? So in other words, the blow has been prevented from completing, but it hasn't been beaten all the way away, Ken's ideal response will be something else. For example, grabbing the blade. Go ahead. Yeah. And the book shows us this also. It may also happen that as the weapons come together, take a little bit more space, as the weapons come together, they just get stuck. Now, you've seen this in the movies a lot, yes? At this point, they start talking about each other's mothers and making kind of grrr sounds, and there's usually a sound like, I don't know, cars crashing together and sparks flying off the blades, and that's not actually realistic, chaps. If you want to see what happens when two sharp swords come together at speed, come to the demonstration tomorrow. We'll be doing it then. Okay? And no, there shouldn't be much in the way of sparks. So, at this point, the game has changed, because if Ken takes a hand off to grab the blade, right, he's going to get hit. If Ken leaves the blade to strike, he's going to get hit. So what Ken has to do is either push Carrie's sword out of the way so he can come in on the inside, in you go, or allow Carrie, who is probably desperately trying to get this sharp, horrible point out of his face, to push it out of his face, and Ken comes in. Okay? So what we call this situation, come back, Ken. What we call this situation where you have to continue to deal with your opponent's weapon with your weapon, yeah, we call this constrained play. Yeah, Zogostrato, constrained play. Which means that they are both constrained, they are obliged on pain of death, literally, to deal with their opponent's weapon before they can do anything else. So what we've built into the game is a randomizer, where, if you take the strike back, where, for example, if Carrie strikes and Ken parries, there's a randomizer in the way the cards are produced that determines whether Carrie's sword gets beaten wide or whether they're stuck in the middle and they are both constrained. Okay? Now, you'll have noticed that that's an either-or proposition in the game. In real life, of course, there's all sorts of degrees of constrainedness. Yes? So we have, you know, not really constrained, yeah, pretty constrained, very constrained, not constrained at all anymore. Yes? And we've had to simply eliminate all of that and say, well, either you're constrained or you're not. And, thanks, chaps. And the thing is, in terms of the game, that's fine. Because it occurred to me that as I have to treat the game designer like a beginner on his first day of training swordsmanship, too many grey areas, too many areas of judgment will lead to a very bad game in the same way that they would lead to a very bad first lesson for a beginner swordsman. Okay, so we've had to cut out a lot of the grey areas, but we've cut them out in the same way that we would teach the art to beginners. And the game designer independently came up with this way of, because the game by itself is quite complicated, as swordsmanship is, there are at least 12 different guards, and if you have 12 different guards, you have at least 144 different possible starting combinations, and that by itself is ridiculous, if you think about it. And then we have at least 7 different blows, so 144 times 7, actually times 49 because there's those two, and then the swords come together and it could be in a parry or a counter-attack, or you can avoid, so multiply that by 3. It's mad. It's fantastically complicated. Chess players think their game is complicated. I'm sorry, no. Chess, there may be more possible games of chess than there are atoms in the universe, but there are more possible sword fights than that by 1 billion miles. Yeah, and that is a technical term. So what we're trying to do, I get fed up getting kicked in the nuts, so I decided, right, from now on, kicking guy in the nuts is represented by a card. No. What we're trying to do is take the critical elements of the system and simply translate those into the game. So, if you play the game, you will learn the guard positions, you will learn what blows can be done from what guard position, you will learn from which guard positions, which actions you can do, and where they are likely to lead, and you will also pick up a basic repertoire of things like kicks in the nuts, which are very, very important. If you don't have kicks in the nuts, it's not a martial art. I don't care anybody says different, no kicks to the balls, not martial art. Okay, so you can see, I hope, that the representation in the cards is, whenever we can make it so, as closely as possible to what you will actually see in the manuscript. Now, are you all familiar with the manuscript? Okay, quick detour. 600 years ago, an absolute fecking genius martial artist called Fiore dei Liberi, who was so damn good at his job that the main street in his hometown of Premariaco in northern Italy is still named after him today. Yes? Now, I'm a professional martial artist, I suppose, but I don't think anybody is going to be naming streets after me anytime soon. Absolutely astonishingly accomplished martial artist. He wrote a book which represents, literally, as he describes it, as the flower of battle. Yes? All the best bits of how sword fighting and basically knightly combat of his period works. And there's wrestling and dagger stuff and longsword and sword in armor and spear and poleaxe and mounted combat with spear, mounted combat with a sword, and wrestling on horseback. It has everything. It is fantastic. You need never read another book except mine, of course. So, the book itself, Fiore's book, it's taken me about a dozen years of working at it full time to really get a proper handle on it. But it's now at the stage where I understand the system he's representing well enough that turning it into a card game is actually possible. The question of why we want to do that is very simply answered. From my perspective, I want the game because I want my students to have an easy and approachable means of picking up the theory and terminology of the system. So from my perspective, the game is only successful if people who play it pick up the terminology and basic theory of the system swiftly and easily. And in game testing so far, we have found that it is working quite well. And every time we've come across a decision point, our defining goal, our signpost is what is more likely to accomplish this goal. So, for example, early on, the idea was floated, well, we don't, kick to the groin, we don't have to have that in Italian, but, oh, no, sorry. I've digressed. I'll be back to the main track in a minute. For example, the blow Mandrillo Fendente, the card has Mandrillo Fendente written on it. Now, we thought in the beginning, well, it would be a lot more accessible to people if we call it forehand descending blow, because then everyone who reads English can see what's on the card. It's like, and I thought, well, hang on, that's not the fucking point. They're supposed to learn the language, because if you don't have the terminology, you can't communicate with your peers in the art. And it was pointed out to me that most of the people who are likely to want to play the game aren't interested in ever training swordsmanship. And my answer was, I don't care. So, I mean, some of you I can see familiar faces, and I can see that some of you have already play-tested the game yesterday. If you choose to play-test it today or tomorrow, then just please bear in mind what our goal is. Our goal is that you will effortlessly, through playing the game, pick up the terminology and theory of the art. If you happen to enjoy it at the same time, that's kind of unfortunate from my perspective, so really we have to introduce push-ups. Good. Okay, posture. One of the interesting things from my perspective about getting involved in this project has been the communication with people who have never handled swords, who have never trained in any martial art, and yet who are highly accomplished in their own particular field. In this case, the artist. And this was one of the very first things he sent me, and he made me promise never to show it to anybody, so I'm sorry, you see. It's too useful not to. And if we just skip back to the previous one, you can see the costumes have been improved hugely. I'll talk about those in a minute. I'm assuming this is Ropecon. Some of you are interested in clothes, costumes, stuff like that. We'll get onto that. But, I mean, look, I'm not sure I can even put my body into that position, but I'll try. This, I mean, my response to that email was this. Right? Because, of course, a martial artist must hold their body in an efficient manner to accomplish the aim that they wish to accomplish. And the aim you wish to accomplish, apparently, in this one, is massive neck pain, tendinitis of the wrists, and, shall we say, computer programmer's disease. Yes? I mean, it is beyond awful. The position of the head. If you get hit in the head with your head in that position, you're going to do serious damage to your neck. Right? It's way too far forward. The shoulders are artificially pulled back, creating this ghastly tension in the shoulder blades, and that brings this arm into this utterly unnatural, I can't move my arm position. And then his hips are sort of, because the head's here and the shoulders are here and the hips are there, it's like, please, that kick in the balls we were talking about. It's a fucking nightmare. But his answer was really interesting. His answer was that he's producing the artwork in this kind of virtual clay computer thing, where once we've got the clothes and the positions right, we can change the clothes and the computer will put the person in all these different clothes. And, I don't really understand it, that's his job. But that monstrosity, that chiropractor's wet dream because they're going to be in business forever, is the standard default thing, that position that the program automatically produces and in which you do all your character work, putting on the clothes and stuff. It's like, it's no fucking wonder these poor programmers are coming to me with sore necks and sore arms or whatever. It's like, that they are taught by their program that this is the default. Anyway. Now, truth be told, I don't know terribly much about medieval clothing. I know just enough to have somebody who really knows what they're doing make me the stuff so that I can make sure that the interpretations I'm coming up with are in no way impacted by the clothing. So clothing affects how you move, so I have to know something about it. But Villa, can I borrow you a second? We actually seem to have a genuine medieval person. Right, and I'll pretty much guarantee that Villa here knows 10 times as much about medieval clothing as I do, but this is A little early for us, I think, wouldn't you? There you go. Yeah, we're looking at about 1410. Thanks, a lot, chap. That's pretty much what they should look like, and I really don't know anything about it. But fortunately, I have friends who do. Are you detecting a general pattern? When I don't know something, I know somebody who knows everything. Okay? And I got various feedbacks from various people, including a whole bunch of pictures. And, you know, one guy was saying, well, you know, the haircut on the last batch of artwork you sent me, it's about 10 years out, you know. And I was, thanks, Bob. And, you know, I defer to my experts, right? Bob knows what he's doing. I just go, right, yes, okay, we'll change it. And sure enough, we changed it, and, you know, he's had no complaints since. But one thing that is particularly interesting is just check the guy with the feathers in his hat in front of a row of people with spears, okay? Now, if we skip back a little bit, you see? You know, they didn't get everything wrong. Exactly. Okay, so we don't know for sure, but there is reason to believe that the character in the funny hat with the feathers in this picture is actually Galeazzo the Mantle. And you might reasonably ask, who the hell is he and why should we care? I will explain. Galeazzo the Mantle is credited in Fiore's introduction, or rather claimed in Fiore's introduction, as a student of the art. And one who said to Fiore says, that it is impossible to master the art without books, okay, which is interesting. But most critically, he fought a guy called Jean Lemaitre, Marshal Boucicaut. Have you heard of Marshal Boucicaut? No? Fine, okay. The most famous knight of the 14th century, okay? At the age of about 28, he was made Marshal of France, which is France's highest military honor. He went on crusade and got his ass completely kicked, but still one of the greatest knights of the age. He was famous for his incredible feats of arms. Things like he could vault onto his horse in full armor, right? He famously climbed up a siege ladder in full armor. You might think that's not very impressive, until I tell you that he was doing it from underneath without using his feet. So, are you a bit more impressed now? Okay, and in, I think it was May or middle of May, 1395, he made some disparaging remarks about the valor of Italian knighthood. And Galeazzo the Mantle, an Italian knight, who actually served as a kind of model of ideal knighthood in a book written in 1396 by a chap called Thomas of Saluzzo. So we know quite a bit about this chap. Galeazzo the Mantle took exception to Boucicaut's opinion and demanded satisfaction, and as was the custom of the time, they tried to separate them, and they, no, don't do this, you'll hurt each other. And they insisted, and eventually a field was set at Padua in August, and they fought. Well, they were supposed to fight. The thing was, Galeazzo, being Italian, was just getting his hair right and taking his time, getting his gear on and getting onto the horse. They were supposed to fight on horseback with spears. Boucicaut got fed up waiting and just jumped off his horse and ran at Galeazzo to hit him with his spear. And according to the chronicles of this particular encounter, Galeazzo whacked the spear out of the way and smacked Boucicaut in the head with the side of his spear. And then the combatants were separated, and they were sort of calmed down, and they kind of agreed not to fight, and then they fought again a few years later. Okay? So, the thing is, of course, let's just have no misunderstandings about this. They fought twice. Galeazzo the Mantle, Fiore de' Liberi's student, beat him twice, and this is the most famous knight in the world at the time. Okay? Marshal Boucicaut led the vanguard of the flower of French chivalry at Agincourt. And you all know how that turned out. And the poor chap was captured at Agincourt, and he died in captivity in England about 6 years later, because it took the French far. He was so famous, the English were demanding a simply staggering amount of money to give him back, and while they were trying to collect the money, he unfortunately died. So there we go. French, Italian, yes. So, and that we think is a picture of Galeazzo the Mantle himself. I included the rest of these. Mostly, see this chap here? That is apparently a very important haircut. Again, I defer to the opinions of experts. Okay, so this is what we ended up with. Okay, so the costume, endless backs and forths about the costume, the hats. Oh, well, I think they need jewels in their hats. Okay, we'll put jewels in. No one will see them because the cards are like this big, but we'll put the jewels in. And Boucicaut, who is this fella, he originally had a beard, and well, actually, French knights in this period, they tended to be clean shaven. I said, fine, okay, the beard goes, there we go. And can you see the patterning? Because the original garment, you know, I think a knight of that standing wouldn't just have a plain garment. He would be, okay. So I forwarded the remarks to our genius artist, Jussi Alarauhio, and what did he do? He went and improved them. So, and there we have them in action, okay? And you notice that the chap who, with his back to us, is Galeazzo, and he has these opposite coloured legs. That's not a genetic defect, that's actually, that's the hose that he's wearing. And if you skip back a little bit, different coloured legs. Now we chose different colours for this one because apparently our artist decided that these different coloured legs, it would be better like this because that would actually reflect the colours in his coat of arms. You have to agree, that's pretty cool. So what I have been doing the last 9 months is trying to make sure that the sword fighting aspect of the game is not the least authentic. And up against the competition of the clothing Nazis, it's been quite tough. I'm sure you've all come across similar issues. Now, I'm imagining that, well, you can see that's pretty cool. Yes? Do we think that's cool? Come on. This is like 9 months' work. Come on, be nice to me. Takes a while, doesn't it? Okay. So this is the artwork we've got so far, and that is all the artwork we've got at the moment, because unfortunately artists of this caliber are not cheap. So some of you may be aware, we are right now raising funds on Indiegogo to complete the game. So obviously it would please me enormously if you all decided you couldn't live another moment without buying a copy of the game before it's even made. So please go ahead and do that. That's fine. I can even provide you with the essential dates and URLs. There we go. Okay. I don't see a kind of, oh, I must get online right now. It's okay. So we will know in 60 days' time whether we are actually going to produce the game or not. And if we do produce the game, well, brilliant. And if we don't, what we have is all of the mechanics of the game worked out. And so we can just send out like black and white text versions of the cards and the rules to anyone who's interested in playing the game. And the work is done, so we can just make that available through a Creative Commons license for free. So the work will not be wasted no matter what happens, but we would like to make it very shiny and beautiful with all the costumes and what have you. So there you have it. So that is what I have been doing for the last 9 months. My question then is, what have you been doing for the last 9 months? Which leads me perfectly in time to questions, and I'm sure you have them. I do not believe for 1 second this is the first year in 13 years of doing this lecture where I don't need to leave you at least an hour of question time. I don't believe it. I'm just so what? Did you hear that? I'm just so stunning. I think that's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. I'm coming again next year. Absolutely, yeah, see me afterwards, we'll sort you out. Okay, any questions? Yes, sir? Clang. Right, okay, Clang. The question is, there's a computer fighting engine that is using Fiore's system. Now, okay, about 2 years ago, Neil Stevenson and some of his friends basically created, I talked about this I think last year, created an imaginary world called Foreworld in which there is this group of mystic knights charging around saving the universe, and it's brilliant. And there's novels, and there's now a graphic novel just came out, all based in this world. But the original conception was always the novels are part 1, a computer game based on sword fighting is part 2, and a movie is part 3. And the movie rights were optioned by Kennedy Marshall a while ago, and so it's somewhere in development hell. God knows when we'll ever see that again. The novels are actually doing quite well, and the computer game raised $500,000 last year on Kickstarter, and unfortunately in computer game terms that is a drop in a bucket, is it not? My involvement with that project is basically when they wanted to know how Fiore's swordsmanship system worked, they hired me to go to Seattle and show them and produce flowcharts and whatever. And actually that was one of the stimuli for developing this card game. It was like I'd been thinking of Fiore's art in game terms for already about a year before the idea for the card game even popped up. So I think your question was, what is my involvement? Well, I think it is a noble idea. I sincerely hope it gets made. I think they are right now scurrying around looking for more funding to develop the game. Basically, I think they need to do the game the way they want to, about 100 million. So if anyone happens to find it down the back of a sofa, I know some chaps in Seattle who would love to have it. So I think it's a brilliant idea. I think they are deliberately pushing the boundaries of what a computer game can do in terms of faithfully representing the art of swordsmanship. And I know the people concerned reasonably well, and many of them have been to many of my seminars when I've been in the States, and so I know they are sincere in their desire to get it right historically. And that, of course, is why I'm interested in working with them. So it's a beautiful idea. Let's hope it sees the light of day. Does that answer your question? Marvelous. There has to be another one somewhere. Yes, sir. Yes? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I didn't bring a poleaxe. I should have done. I usually do. Oh yeah, sure, why not? Okay. Pretend for one moment that is an axe. Okay? This is not going to work. Come and strike. Not going to work, yes? But there's always a trade. The extra force you get from the axe blow comes at the price of the axe being more difficult to maneuver. Okay? So, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's slower, but fortunately, and remember this, Fiore loves us and wants us to be happy, right? There is always a solution in the book somewhere. And if you were to go to the 5th play of the second master of the Gioco Largo, you would see this. He says, wait in a narrow stance with the left foot forward, and when he comes to strike, meet his sword in the middle and let it run off to the ground and strike him on the other side. And this play is good in armor, this play is good against a sword, an axe, or a stick, heavy or light. So, basically, it changes what works against it. But in terms of the system, and this is one thing we want to do with the card game, if we actually get to make it, we are planning on introducing things like poleaxe and spear and armor. I mean, our first stretch goal, and listen closely you lot, our first stretch goal is to produce a historically accurate, based on an authentic, historical, badass female warrior, right? Because there were plenty, and they are grossly underrepresented in gaming. And let me give you a tip. The armor they wore did not expose their thighs. So yes, help us do that, please. That'd be really cool. But in game terms, okay, what the action that Ken just did there is a mandrilo fendente. And all we have to do is articulate that because this weapon has different properties, some things that we can do against a sword, we cannot do against the axe. Okay? And the prime amongst those is we can't bind it, we can't stop it in the middle of its path. But what we can do is get out of the way and hit him on the other side. And so long as we can reflect that the axe is slower, then it should work quite well. In real life, Fiore loves us and wants us to be happy, so we have dagger against sword in both directions. So the dagger attacking the sword and the sword attacking the dagger. Why anyone with a dagger would want to attack a man with a sword is beyond me, but it's there in the book, so we have to learn it. And he has, he mentions poleaxe against sword. He also mentions what to do with the sword against somebody with a spear. So, in particular, for example, guards that are good to wait in if the chap is going to attack with a spear. So it's all there. And basically, it boils down to physics. Yeah. It's partly a matter of reach. The axe is longer. We can't represent that here because the swords are the same length. The axe is longer. The spear is longer still. The sword is more maneuverable. So, yeah, I guess the one-word answer to that is practice. Does that answer your question? Welcome. Other questions? Yes, sir. Do some weapons... Let me make sure I understand this. Do some weapons favor a more aggressive style and some weapons favor a more cautious one? Okay. In terms of the weapons, no. In terms of the culture from which they come and the environment in which they're supposed to be used, yes. Let me give you an example. Okay, in medieval combat, if Ken and I are about to fight, yes, sorry Ken, right? If Ken and I are about to fight, then one thing we have to do is actually take you guys into account, because this style would primarily be used in public, in legal combat, sometimes even judicial combat. And so this sort of thing, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me, yeah. Even if I won, my fame in the art of arms would go down significantly, yes? So you're not just fighting to win the fight, you're fighting for renown, for basically an awful lot of almost all actual combats is all about social credit. And so you would come forward instead, I'm gonna fuck you up, bang, 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 and then horrible things would happen, yes? And of course, you train for your entry. You train how you cross the ground looking like you're going to do bloody murder and enjoy it. Yes? And that is a whole separate skill that you don't see in, for example, use of the rapier. Completely different. Now, I'll be going into this in more detail tomorrow, but let's start with an unequal match, shall we? Okay. There's yours. Hang on. This one's not blunt. Tell you what, there you go. Right, let me show you how an intelligent person approaches somebody holding a weapon like that, who's pointing it at you and wants to kill you. Okay? And this is how they tell you to do it in the books. Okay? Approach with a leaden sandal. Okay? So literally as if you have lead weights in your feet. Because, I'll tell you something, I really kind of, what's the word? I guess, I emotionally grasped this when, I think it was 2005, I went to the Wallace collection, and David Edge very kindly let me take out a whole bunch of original swords from the displays, and I had a friend with me, and I put an original rapier, not too different to that one, fairly rigid blade, sharp, nasty point, and the thing about that point is at this, right now, it's pointed at my face. I can't see it. The sword has disappeared. Yes? So if as I get further away, he will change the angle of the sword so I can't see it. Drop the point an inch more. That's it, it's disappeared. I cannot see how long that sword is. I can't even see where it is. I can see the grip but not the blade at all. It's invisible. Right? So as I come forward like this, I have to literally find, there it is. Oh, thank God for that. Yes. Oh shit, it's gone again, help! Yes. And so the whole setup of the fight is completely different because, firstly, nobody's watching. All you have to do is stay alive. You do not have to, show great valor and majesty. No. This is illegal, technically. Technically, you could be hanged for dueling at most periods, in most places during the period in which the rapier was in use. So, you don't want everybody to see you're about to have a fight because then they might call the authorities and you won't get to have a fight at all. It's very irritating. Yes? So you quietly nip out the back of the pub, or you meet at dawn is the traditional one, in some remote location far away from prying eyes, and you start this far away, and you go very carefully and slowly forward. And it is very, very cautious, and oh shit, that sword is sharp, and he actually wants to kill me because I said something about his mum, and actually it was true. And you see the problem? Yeah, so, yeah, it's not about the weapon, it's about the context in which it is used. Does that answer your question? Brilliant. Yes, sir? In the game. Right now, the game is only longsword. Okay? We will work out how to get particularly things like poleaxes and spears in later on. And I think we will probably start out having it so that you have to have the same weapons, because otherwise it gets very, very complicated. But ideally, over time, you'll be able to choose whatever weapon you want. But we start with a sword because that's what I do. I'm into the swords. Does that answer your question? Yeah. The game? Yeah, the game is, at the moment, exclusively Fiora. It is designed to teach, primarily it's designed to teach my students Fiora's system. However, if we make enough money, and that is a huge, great big if, we are planning on introducing German swordsmanship into the game. Because at the same time that Fiore was writing, there was the Lichtenau system in Germany, and that has a whole lot of different and very cool stuff. There's nothing intrinsically different in the kind of the base underlying way the swords are being used, but firstly, the Germans, we think, are using longer swords, and that changes something about what happens when the blades actually meet. And they have some really cool stuff which we would like to include, but to do that in a historically sort of ethical way, it has to be absolutely clear which system is which. And so this is going to annoy those who tend to practice Lichtenau. I see the Lichtenau system as an expansion pack on Fiore. You can clap, that's okay, it's allowed. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, I'm hoping that we will eventually make a separate game for the rapier. Now, the thing is, in between, if we look at Italian martial arts, okay, from the 14th century, Fiore wrote his book in, well, one copy of Fiore's book is dated to 1410. From then to the rapier, the first real rapier books, we start seeing them in the late 16th century. So there's nearly 200 years in between. Okay? And in between, we have what's called the Bolognese system, where they use a gigantic two-handed sword, and they also use single-handed swords, a bit like this, but with a slightly shorter blade that's wider and more suited for this kind of manly sword swinging, not this effeminate pokey stuff, as they might see it. I think it's likely, if we ever get there, that the Bolognese system, if we represent it in a game, ought to be at least somewhat compatible with the previous system, and the rapier system ought to be somewhat compatible with the Bolognese system. But I don't feel any pressing need to make the rapier system compatible to the Fiore system because they are separated so widely in time. I don't think anybody ever had a sword fight with this setup. I may be wrong. In fact, historically, I'm almost certainly wrong because it's bound to have happened at some point. But nobody in any of the manuscripts talks, or any of the published books talks about it. So it's, yeah, it's nerve-wracking, isn't it? Yeah, as to which is the better weapon, well, I'm not answering that one. Does that answer your question? Great. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, when you hit someone with a sword, they sometimes die. Not always. I mean, there are some absolutely fantastic examples of duels that occurred between utter psychopaths. And, you know, there's one where one guy had over 30 stab wounds to the body, and he survived, right? So it's a bit of an oversimplification to say, I hit you in the head with a sword, and now you're dead. Yeah? But in our game, the thing is, you can play it however you want, really. You can play it so that you fight to one hit. One hit with a sword is considered lethal, that's the end of the game. We envision that people will tend to play best of 5, okay? Because not every sword blow is lethal, and it can be somewhat unsatisfying if you just do a kind of sudden death. And also, we are working on an expansion pack which introduces armor into the game. And in an armored duel, it was quite common for people to fight to a specific number of blows of a set of different weapons. So you might fight 3 blows of the spear, 3 blows of the sword, 3 blows of the dagger, for example. And so when we get the armored stuff in, then we can tweak how the kind of the basic default game setup. But basically, we also wanted to introduce the idea that if this is a judicial fight, then let's say Ken and I had challenged each other. Yeah, you probably want a different sword, don't you? Okay, right. Okay, let's say Ken challenged me because I said something about his mum, right? Whether it's true or not remains to be seen. God will decide. Okay? Now the thing is, in this setup, okay, if this was a judicial combat, not all the time and not in every place, but this was fairly common, okay? For Ken to successfully prove his challenge, he must hit me with the sword. Right, okay, yes, I'm sorry. What I said about your mum was clearly not true. God has decided. Okay? But here is a winning strategy if you have no social credit anyway. Okay? All I have to do is not get hit until the end of the fight, until the sun touches the horizon, and I will win. Sorry, sun's touched the horizon, you'll be taken off and hanged, and what I said about your mum, it was true. Okay, so, yeah, of course, I would never be hired as a swordsman again, but, you know, the point is that in the game, to completely answer your question, we have it so if you play to best of 5, the attacker or the defender can win, the challenger or the defender can win with 3 strikes, or the defender can win with 2 ties. Because the way the card game is set up, ties are possible when either you both run out of cards or you both find yourselves in a position from which you cannot act. And in those circumstances, 2 of those counts as a victory for the defender. Because time has run out and the challenger has failed to prove his challenge. Whether you then take him away and hang him is entirely up to you. Does that answer your question? No. Yeah, we haven't got any damage mechanics because they're firstly unnecessary and secondly inaccurate. So it's kind of better to do without them, I thought. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yep. It really depended. Yes, quite often, for example, in the Galeazzo and Busico duels, they were both in armor, and neither of them was killed in either eventuality. So in both fights, they both survived. If it is something you should know about tournaments in the Middle Ages is that normally, if you were defeated by your opponent, he got to keep your equipment. In other words, your armor, your weapons, and your horse, which is a bit like racing your Ferrari around the block, and whoever wins gets to keep the other chap's Ferrari, right? We're talking about seriously expensive hardware. So you could make a fortune by doing well in tournaments, and you could lose a fortune by doing badly in tournaments. So they weren't always to the death, no. But the thing is, actually this happened a little while ago in Canada. A couple of guys who were quite experienced at fighting in armor, and they were using blunt swords, which is unhistorical, but never mind. Still, one of the blunt swords went through the chainmail gusset under an armpit and came within a few millimeters of cutting the brachial artery. So, yeah, that's a semi-friendly fight with blunt weapons in full armor, and somebody nearly died. So, yeah, armor doesn't make you safe. People trying not to hurt you tends to make you safe. Or rather, acquiring excellent self-defense skills makes you safe. Yeah, right. Okay. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Other questions? Yes? Yes? Yep. That's a very interesting question. How does the German stuff work with the Fiore stuff? Well, some of it you can, it's a little bit disingenuous, but you can you can do a one-to-one correlation. So for example, Ken, if I could borrow you as a target, okay? This, in Fiore's system, is Maduro Fendente, and this, in the Lichtenauer system, is an Oberhau, right? So some of the stuff is just a one-to-one. A lot of the Lichtenauer material derives from the plays of the Zornhau Ord. Now, if Ken comes to strike with an Oberhau, and I use an Oberhau to strike his blade out of the way and stab him in the face, that is the Zornhau Ord. He may have objections to being treated like this, quite reasonably, and so what will tend to happen is we get stuck. Yeah? And the things the Germans will do from here are a bit different, but this particular setup will happen in the game already if, for example, Ken's Maduro Fendente is counterattacked by my Maduro Fendente and he parries that. Okay? We're in the same setup. So from game terms, what we would do there is, and I've been thinking about it quite a bit, we just had a seminar with a German instructor come over, and we spent quite a lot of time going over exactly this kind of stuff. The techniques which are solutions to that problem are different in the Lichtenauer system than they are in the Fiore system. So the Lichtenauer expansion would simply introduce those techniques. It would also introduce the other guards that the Germans use. For example, we have Posta di Donna and they have Montag. Yeah? We have Fenestra and they have Ox. Not the same positions. We don't have this sort of thing at all in Fiore. We have something like it in the Bolognese, but in the Lichtenauer system, it's different. This is called Flug. Let me just make this point, because this is quite interesting. Okay, Italian names for guards. Posta di Donna, guard of the woman. Posta di Finestra, guard of the window. Posta frontale, frontal guard. Posta longa, posta breve, long and short. Tutta porta di ferro, iron gate. Coda longa, long tail. Dente di cingaro, the position of the wild boar's tooth. Okay? Pretty. Germans. Ox, plough, of the day or of the roof, and the fool. I mean, really, they're a bunch of fucking farmers. Don't quote me. But let me just at this point out that I have some friends who are very, very good at Lichtenauer swordsmanship system, and I have fought them on equal terms. The stuff is good. The names are a bit crap, but the stuff is good. Okay, so I think actually introducing the Lichtenauer material into the game, the hardest part is going to be raising the money. The easy part, it'll be actually quite easy to fit it in, I think. And again, you do need to know what an Overlaufen is, don't you? Because it sounds good. Does that answer your question? Marvellous. Other questions? Yes, sir. Okay, how much do the combat systems help you in a real battle? Okay, firstly, we have to define what a real battle is, and that is not a simple question, okay? It really depends hugely. If you're facing cannon or arrows, not really at all. You know, we have this thing in the Saal where I get my 357 Magnum and my students have to parry. We tried it and then we ran out of students, so we stopped doing it. The thing is, the representation of the material in the sources that we have is exclusively one-on-one, because that's where all the interesting stuff happens. In period, it was generally considered that a reasonable qualification for, if you like, an officer, somebody who is leading men into battle, a reasonable qualification is he's a kick-ass good swordsman in a one-on-one situation. There's no real logic to that. The actual skill set is, I think, quite different. And of course, again, on a medieval battlefield, if you are a knight, the risks you face are completely different to if you are a peasant. Because if you are a peasant, people will just slaughter you because you have no value. Right? If you are a knight, people will generally, if they can get away with it, try to capture you because you have value. Now, killing you and taking your armor is great, but if I can capture you and take you back, we can ransom you to your side again, or ransom you back to your family, as they try to do with Busiko, and you can make an absolute fortune, plus you get to keep the armor, so it's in addition to the armor that you get if you kill him, not instead of. So, we have I think the popular imagination of what a medieval battlefield was like is pretty inaccurate. And as to how actually useful single combat skills are, I think it really depends. I think if you're really used to sword fighting a lot, and you set things up so you just for fun sword fight more than one person at a time, because people did that, it's not unreasonable to suppose that it would convey some advantage just because you're used to hitting people with swords. Does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir. Were they organized or were they more one-on-one? So in other words, did people seek out individual opponents and fight them, or did it tend to be massed troops? It depended hugely, and it depended in terms of what the people were fighting about, how many people were on the field, the quality of the people on the field. It's a hugely variable thing. Sometimes you would get situations where knights would fight each other one-on-one deliberately. I'm sure it happened, and there are stories about it in historical documents that refer to that sort of thing. But generally speaking, I don't think we would have called it a battle if that was mostly what people did. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir. What? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Actually, I think something to add to that is that the current scholarship suggests actually that medieval battles, and ancient battles for that matter, did not actually look like giant rugby scrums. They didn't have two lines of people constantly wailing at each other. What they did look like is a riot, right? Where you have a mass of people on one side, and then you have the riot cops on the other, and what happens is they surge towards each other. So they're actually operating out of reach. You charge and you stop about 3 meters away from the other dude, and you posture. And then after a while, you work up the courage to surge, and usually you have 1 or 2 really, really brave people, what the Greeks referred to as the killers of men. And they would surge up, and they would pull the people from their unit with them, and then you get a short clash, which would last for about a minute. And then some people would die, and some people would, retreat, and so on. And that would happen on both sides until one side or the other broke and started running away. And when they started running away and they were getting chased down is when something like 90% of all the actual killing took place. So if you want to see what a medieval battle would look like, look up a G8 protest or take a trip to South Korea.
Isn't it nice having students who actually study? Okay, there was a question over here. Yes? Okay, remember Fiore loves us and wants us to be happy. He doesn't show anything to do if you are left-handed, but in the mounted combat section, he actually states explicitly that this particular technique is good against these sorts of blows and against left-handers. And Caballero, for example, a couple of hundred years later, has a plate where he tells you how to deal with left-handers. So it's not that left-handers are evil or bad. My sister's a left-hander. So is my dad. I am not. The sources, the reasonable assumption is that the person reading the book is right-handed. Yeah, because most people are. But the sources will quite often refer to what to do if your opponent is left-handed. Does that help? Good. Yes, sir. Well, I hope you enjoy it. Good. Any other questions? Yes, sir. I'm sorry? What decisions do players make and what's the core mechanic? Okay. The first decision players make is what guard position to start from. That will determine what actions you can make. When somebody throws a strike from the guard position that they're in, the defender chooses an action, some kind of strike, to deal with that attack, usually. And they can determine whether it's, depending on the position they're in and the actions they can do, they may be able to parry or to counterattack or to break it to the ground or to get out of the way. So the defender has a reasonable degree of options if they have the right cards in their hand to play them, obviously. And I think the kind of underlying mechanic of it is the scarcity of the cards. You don't get all of the cards in the deck to play with. You get a set number of basic actions plus some drawn at random. You can then you can make trades. Initially, you can trade as many cards as you want for the same number from the deck, and then you can trade after that 2 for 1. So you can modify the content of your hand till you get what you want. From there, you choose your guard position. From there, you choose, depending on the attack that you get, you choose the defense that you make. And there's one of the interesting processes about how the game was developed, because we came up with all sorts of logical inconsistencies. So, for example, Ken, if you can come this side, go to Finestra on the left. At one point in the game, if Ken was in that guard position, and I attacked a Mandrillo Fendente, he died. Because there was nothing he could do, because not every blow can parry every other blow. Yeah, we have it set up so, for example, I think at the moment, a reversal Fendente, which he can do from there, because it operates in the same plane, just an ordinary reversal Fendente. Yeah, because it operates in the same plane as a Mandrillo Fendente, it can't parry it. Of course, that's an oversimplification, because if you just change the line, you can use it to parry, and we are trying to work footwork in there too. Haven't sussed that one yet. But at the moment, let's say if you're in Tour de Force Ferro, and let's say I happen to pick this guard to start from, and let's say I'm the challenger, as I come and strike, he can parry it, he can counterattack against it, yeah? And when he parries it, the cards will tell us whether we get stuck in the middle or whether my sword is beaten wide. From here, if I have sufficient boldness, I can enter in with a pommel strike or something similar. If he's parried me, he has the initiative and can then strike. I have to parry that, and again, we'll determine whether we get stuck in the middle or whether it gets beaten aside. So the sword fight can progress as, a whole series of parry by blow, parry by blow, parry by blow, or it can be over in one shot, which is exactly like it is in real life. So we know we're getting close to the right set of mechanics when the stuff that happens in the game translates easily into the drills that we use in the basic syllabus. And it's working quite well at the moment, but we could improve it. Does that answer your question? You look suspicious. I'm sorry? Hand management. Okay, once we've gone to one round where somebody is hit and somebody has been hit, then you restore your full complement of. So you take from the deck, you take as many cards as you've spent, and the ones that you have spent remain spent. So you will end up cycling through the entire deck if you play for long enough. And at any point when you do that, you can make the trade so you can adjust and manage what is in your hand. You don't get complete control over it, and trades come at a cost, but then that's basically realistic because you can't always do exactly what you want. Does that help? I think the best answer to that is, why don't we play test it afterwards? I'll be very happy to take you through it. Okay, yes sir? Okay. Okay. In the game, we have to determine the challenger and the defender. Okay? And the reason for that is we are modeling it on judicial combat, where that is set in advance of the fight. Okay? So in some historical contexts, the challenger is set and the defender is set. And the law has different requirements of both roles. Okay? And so we represent that in the game. How we choose who is the challenger and who is the defender is fairly straightforward. If I say, Ken, I'm going to kick your ass at a game of Audacia, I'm automatically the challenger. If we both sort of mutually decide it'd be quite nice to have a card game, how about it? Then we have to determine the challenger and the defender. And currently, our game designer has put in the rules that if you have no other way of doing it, use rock, paper, scissors, the winner is the challenger. Does that answer your question? Okay, how that affects the flow of the game. Basically, primarily it means that in the first action, I, as the challenger, get to throw the first blow. Okay? But you can also, if let's say it's set up so that, let's say you're in Finestra on the left again, and I'm in Donna on the right, and the blow that I want to do is a Mandrilo Fendente, and I can't because of the guard position he's in, I can spend my initiative, if you like, I can make my first action a change of guard. And as I change guard, he can either wait, change guard, or strike. So he has the option to just play from this guard setup instead, and I still have the initiative, or as I make that motion, he can change guard, or as I make that motion, he can strike onto my prepared defense. Does that help? Yep. And of course, I'm hoping that you will all have a go at the game at some point over the weekend. That's ambitious, I know, but the best way to find out about it is to play it. And, you know, we are here to help. And there are lots of us who have these little badges on who will help you play it at any time. Okay. Does that answer your question? Marvelous. Okay, other questions? I don't believe it. Yes, sir. Yes. Okay, how much is the card game dependent on skill? I probably should not admit this, but I am an honest person. I have lost almost every single game I've ever played. So let me cast that another way. If you've ever wanted to beat me in a sword fight, this is your best chance. So, okay, one thing that I noticed when playing it with various people is people who are good at card games, who have experience in playing card games, can apply the rules as they are written and do stuff that I would never do because I don't have the card game rules variation running in my head. I have what I would actually do if I was having a sword fight running in my head, and they don't perfectly map. I mean, my initial frustration was, well, hang on, in this guard position, I can do just about any damn blow I choose, right? And damn it, I'll make it work. And in the game, I'm constrained to, I think, this one, and I think this one, and I think the thrust. I'll have to look it up, okay? Because, again, we are in playtesting, so stuff is changing all the time. Experience in the game helps, because if you know what your blows can do, and you know what guards you can do them from, and you know what your opponent has in their deck, because the decks are not secret, you can come to a reasonable guess as to what your opponent can do, and you can modify your actions so that you either strike to produce a specific response for which you have a prepared counter, or you can strike in expectation of actually making that strike work. And that is exactly how it works when you're actually fencing people. The problem is, I'm personally not very good at doing it in the abstract. I'm not a very abstract person at all. I'm sort of, concrete reality, that's where I live. If I've understood your question correctly, I have actually answered it. Marvelous, good. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yep. Yes. Yep, certainly. Okay. Every now and then we have to bite the bullet of, this is a card game, it is not a sword fight. So for example, from this position, posto di donna on the right, Fiore says you can do all 7 blows of the sword. If we had that in the game, that's the only guard position anybody would ever use, because it would be the best. And the thing is, what Fiore means by this is, I think, from the right-hand side, you can strike downwards or across, and you can strike upwards, and you can strike with a thrust, and you can take the same guard on the other side and strike downwards from the other side, and across, and upwards, and so we go. In the game, the strikes from posto di donna are more restricted. Yeah. So at the moment, and I'm going to plead with the designer for a tweak on this because it's just too frustrating because it's not exactly what it says in the book and it's killing me. Mandura fendente you can do because obviously that is you're obviously chambered to strike in that line, and you can also do the thrust, and that's it. So we restricted it quite a lot. But then posto di donna gives you Fiore gives us 4 virtues, yes? You're familiar with Fiore's virtues? No, of course not. This is a role-playing convention. It is not a convention for geeks who are into Italian medieval combat. Thank you for giving me a heart attack. That was delightful. Fiore has 4 virtues, or he describes 4 virtues that a swordsman must possess. And they are strength, swiftness, boldness, which gave us the name of the game, audacia, and foresight, avisamento, or prudentia. So we've incorporated those virtues into the mechanics of the game so that in any given position, one or the other will normally have an advantage in that particular virtue, and those advantages convey specific benefits in the game. For example, Ken, if I could borrow you. Let's say Ken is in Tutto Porto di Ferro, which in the game conveys +2 boldness on parries. And I am in posto di donna on the right. And that gives me +2 strength when striking. Yeah? So my very strong strike meets his very bold parry. Which means, because I am stronger, I get to choose whether we are stuck this way around or this way around. So in other words, in the constrained play situation, my strength gives me, I can make sure that I can act on the inside and he has to act on the outside, or I get to act on the outside and he has to act on the inside. And I'll make that choice based on the cards in my hand. You know, if I have a bunch of cool entry cards for the outside, I want him to open that line, okay? But his superior boldness means that as he parries, he can acquire the initiative and get the first entry. I still get to choose on which side it comes, but he gets the initiative. So his guard position gives him an advantage in boldness, mine gives mine an advantage in strength, and they convey specific advantages in the way the game is played. Does that answer your question? Marvelous. You've had 2 already. Yes. Okay, interesting question. If there is a guard position from which you can do all 7 blows, why would you use any other? Okay, well, here's an example of a guard position from which you can do all 7 blows. I'm in the middle, I can thrust, I can do reverso fendente, mandrillo fendente, reverso mezzano, mandrillo mezzano, reverso sottano, mandrillo mezzano, mandrillo sottano. Yes? I can do all 7 blows from there. And here's the thing. In sport fencing, for example, and with shorter weapons, all guards are basically variations on this. Okay? Because they give you that maximum sort of variability in the things you can do. But the cost is power. Okay? So how hard I can hit Ken from here compared to how hard I can hit him from here. Yes? The further the sword is from the target, the more time it has to accelerate, the faster it's moving when it gets there, the harder it will hit. So we're not, in 15th century or 14th century Italian medieval stuff, we are not fighting from here. We are fighting with great big, I'm going to cut your fucking arms and legs and head off blows. Partly because they work better against somebody in armor, partly because they convey a sense of your superior boldness, and partly because when people are frightened and they are fighting for their lives, it is much easier to have them do big solid motions than it is to have them to do little fine motor ones. So it makes sense then that there are guard positions which convey these various advantages of chambering particular blows so that you can actually hit with some serious oomph. And of course you're advertising in advance the blow you're going to do. So I'm going to strike like this, aren't I, Ken? Yes? So of course I strike like that. So of course you can always lie. Does that answer your question? Marvellous. I think we have some time for more questions. Yes, sir? Can you bluff? Yes, we have a card you can play called the Taunt, where basically if I play that card, I force him to act when he may not want to. We also have, God, I should know the cards better. We have another one which does something similar. So, yeah, it's difficult to force somebody in a card game to overcommit, and you would tend to do that through strategic playing of your cards rather than by playing one specific action. But yes, that sort of thing is possible in the game. At least it should be. Does that answer your question? Marvellous. Okay, a question from this side of the room. Yes, sir? My personal favourite weapon? That depends entirely on what I'm doing with it. For actually cutting stuff, I have an absolutely gorgeous, handmade, pattern well-bladed longsword of doom. Touch it and I will kill you. Well, here's a good example. This thing weighs about 1.3 kilos and is extremely long. So if I'm looking to learn precision and to build up endurance in the hand, this is my weapon of choice. So when I'm doing solo drills with the rapier, this is, unless I'm actually hitting a target hard with the point, this is the weapon I would tend to use. If I am hitting the target hard with the point, the blade needs to bend, or we end up with going through too many targets. So I use something like this. So it really depends on... I think I misunderstood your question. I think your question was really, what is my favorite sword for an actual sword fight? Yeah, sorry. Again, it depends. Have you seen the sort of 20 years of Ropecon exhibition downstairs? Okay, in one of the cabinets there is one of my swords. It's a short, slightly curved bladed thing with a knuckle bow, and it's beautifully light with a kind of T-rib on the back, so it's rigid and it cuts like hell, and it goes through anything that's in front of it, and it's nice and short and concealable, and I think of it as my metro sword. I do most of my work with a longsword, but there's this switch in my head. If I'm teaching longsword, then It'd be like, what is this ridiculous object? Yuck. Rubbish, nasty, modern crap. Ah, here we have a proper weapon. And if I'm teaching rapier, it's, what is this fucking antique? Ah, proper manly weapon, there we go. So, yeah, it's, if I only liked one, that's all I would teach. And I like too many, so. Does that answer your question? Okay, other questions? We have, I think, time for one more. Yes, sir. The best weapon against a lot of people is an army. Other questions? All right, I think we have time for one more, yes. Yep. Okay, if you go to swordschool.com, you will find, well, firstly, there's a beginner's course, and we'll teach you all about it live. But on our website, you should be able to find links to Fiore's actual manuscript. If you buy my friend Tom's translation of the manuscript, I will provide it for you with his translation and the pictures laid out together. That's not available commercially, but I have an agreement with Tom that if you buy the translation, then you get it with the pictures as well. And I have written books on the subject, which you are welcome to buy. And there's also, lots of articles and stuff through the website. You can find them, and lots of videos we have put up of our basic training drills and stuff, which should also help. Does that answer your question? Marvelous. Okay, so let me just finish off with this thought. Okay, it is impossible to faithfully, perfectly represent the art of swordsmanship in a card game. But we have done it. Thank you.
Ropecon.